nothing has changed. Flexible wings or rigid wings, McLaren continues to dominate with Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris doing whatever they wanted in the Spanish Grand Prix on the Montmeló test track. Will it be a one-sided championship from here to the end of the 2025 Formula One season? Unfortunately, the suspicion is there because Ferrari and Red Bull tried everything possible to overturn predictions and logic, without changing much. However, Ferrari, with Charles Leclerc's third place and Lewis Hamilton's sixth, made a big leap forward, grabbing second place in the Constructors' standings, overtaking Red Bull and Mercedes in one swoop, and returning more or less to the top spots. Leaving the German team behind should not be an issue given the mistakes and mechanical failures of Toto Wolff's team, but beating Red Bull will be difficult, although not impossible. The excitement of the Spanish Grand Prix came from the unconventional strategies chosen by Ferrari and Red Bull. The two sets of new medium Pirelli tires were supposed to give Charles Leclerc a big advantage and push him higher up. In reality, the soft Pirellis turned out to be faster than expected even over race distance. And the final safety car gifted Charles the podium, otherwise his position would have been a modest fourth. Despite this, Charles Leclerc got off to a great start, jumping from 7th to 5th and then 4th thanks to a box-ordered position swap with Hamilton. It must also be said that with the first set of mediums, Charles Leclerc clocked many laps at the same pace as the McLarens ahead of him, with a gap of about 10 seconds at mid-race. That's a lot, but also not much considering Ferrari's struggles in this first part of the season. Then, after the safety car, Charles Leclerc didn't hesitate to decisively attack Max Verstappen, who was on hard tires unlike the Ferrari running softs. Yes, the Monegasque moved slightly off the line, but there is a difference between that and dirty driving. The Ferrari driver made a firm attack, not an attempt to push his rival off track. If this isn't the lens through which these moves are assessed, Formula One ultimately loses its essence. As for Max Verstappen, the reason for the late collision with George Russell when the Briton was already ahead isn't entirely clear. He probably braked late and tapped the Mercedes. But given his past incidents and aggressive driving style, there are no certainties. The 10-second penalty given by the stewards, despite Max Verstappen returning the position, was harsh, dropping him from 4th to 10th and ruining Red Bull's spectacular three-stop strategy. Back to Ferrari, the thrills and strong points once again came from Charles Leclerc, while Lewis Hamilton was invisible and, to make matters worse, was overtaken 2 laps from the end by an impressive Nico Hülkenberg, who had started 15th on the grid. It was the first real standout performance from the Sauber Audi under former Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto. Lewis Hamilton's slump continues. Will he wake up at some point? As for the Italian side, something is moving. Slowly, cautiously, with desperate attempts like Charles Leclerc sacrificing qualifying in favor of race setup. The limitations of the SF25 project remain, exposed by a demanding track like the Catalan one. Just to give a sense, in the final 5 laps on equal tires, Charles Leclerc lost 10.4 seconds. Realistically, hopes for the title are now just a flicker, but maybe, step by step, some wins will come. Provided there is patience, a lot of patience. A virtue Ferrari fans have long resigned themselves to. The only positive news for Ferrari from the Barcelona weekend was the 3rd podium of the season, secured by Charles Leclerc, and 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship standings. The less encouraging news is that there has been no shift triggered by the flexible wing regulations. McLaren remains out of reach, and Red Bull isn't quite within range either. After the qualifying session at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, Charles Leclerc had taken responsibility for the choices made in preparation for the 66-lap race, namely sacrificing a set of softs in Q3 to have an extra set of mediums in the race. And judging by the final result, he was right. However, Charles Leclerc's merits were mostly in his driving. A crucial difference in the Monegasque's race came in the first half lap, when he passed Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, immediately latching on to Lewis Hamilton's slipstream, as the Briton would later have to let him through due to a clear difference in pace. Once in 4th place, though, Charles Leclerc's race seemed to hit a ceiling. During the final stint, his pace on the second set of mediums was not particularly fast, as George Russell behind him was able to reduce the gap from 7 to 4 seconds. The safety car proved providential, allowing Charles Leclerc to switch back to softs, which helped him defend from George Russell and attack Max Verstappen, who had rejoined on hards. There is, however, a small mystery surrounding Charles Leclerc's final laps. His lap times were not very impressive, and when Frederick Vasseur was asked whether there had been a problem with the car, as Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff mentioned a possible oil leak, his answer was an indirect confirmation. The Monegasque driver admitted that they had a small problem, but pointed out that it had nothing to do with an oil leak. At the end of the race, Charles Leclerc forced a smile. Third place wasn't the result he had hoped to greet as good news, but in light of this first third of the season, it effectively is. Charles Leclerc commented that they had decided the day before to sacrifice qualifying somewhat in order to have a better race, but he had not expected to finish on the podium, so he was very happy. He said the first two stints had been very positive, while the last one on the medium tires had been a bit more complicated. However, when the safety car appeared, it gave them the opportunity to fit soft tires again, and they made the most of it. A very different atmosphere was felt on the other side of the garage. Lewis Hamilton described the race as one of his worst experiences, and when asked if there was at least something positive to take away, his answer was blunt: 0. Frederick Vasseur's response was clear. The Ferrari team principal stated that he thought Lewis Hamilton spent about 70% of the race ahead of George Russell, and he did not believe the Mercedes man considered his race a disaster. However, he explained that they had a problem with Lewis Hamilton's car during the last stint, before the safety car. The French manager added that the result was not good, but Lewis Hamilton had completed 45 laps in front of George Russell. Once again, the Maranello team's boss did not want to disclose the issue that occurred on car number 44. Lewis Hamilton concluded that the race had been far from what he had hoped for. He had been confident before the race, following a good qualifying and with the car seemingly improving in performance. But during the race, the balance was not what he wanted, and they lacked pace from the start. The 7-time Formula One world champion said they currently had no explanation and would need to analyze the data to understand if there had been some kind of problem. The Briton congratulated his Maranello teammate for doing a great job and deserving the podium. It was noted that in the last 5 races, Charles Leclerc had reached the podium 3 times, while Lewis Hamilton had not been there once since joining Ferrari, and discontent was beginning to surface. Judging solely by the result, Ferrari technically met its pre-race objective, though not entirely on merit, while still showing familiar difficulties both in relation to rivals and in tire management and behavior. A familiar story that once again forced the drivers to endure a difficult race. Ferrari therefore picked up 23 points at the end of the Spanish Grand Prix weekend in Barcelona and is now in second place in the Constructors' Championship. It is the Maranello team's 832nd Formula One podium, a 46th for Charles Leclerc. There are 2 weeks to go now before the next round of the 2025 Formula One Championship, when the cars will be back in action at the Gilles Villeneuve circuit in Montreal for Round 10, the Canadian Grand Prix.